こんにちは。
ああ、どうもどうも、最上さんじゃないか。
一つお願いがあって。
また金貸してくれって？
やば、またとか、やば、お願いがあって。
はい。
山手線一周するんですけど。
めっちゃいいやん。うん。
サイコロで、なんかやるんですけど、ちょっとサイコロが埋まらなくて。
各駅ついてサイコロ振ってなんかするみたいなこと？
違います。アイテムでサイコロを一回ずつ振るんですけど。
はいはい。
例えば、1出たら、バトルして、勝ったら進めるとか、あって、今、あと2つ残ってるんですよ。
なるほどね。
はい。あと4と6だけ埋めてほしいんです。
4やから、死ぬとかは？
おい！何やってんだよ！あなたがこれで刺したの？はい。なんで？誰？知り合い？知り合いです。あなたがこれで刺したのね。現着しました。被疑者確保、被害者一見指定死んでおります。刃物も現状。知り合いで刺したとの実況あり。9時58分現在。逮捕ない。
At 9:50 in the morning on March 11th, 2025, Sato Airi, a 22-year-old Japanese online live streamer, was streaming herself walking around the Takadanobaba neighborhood of Tokyo, Japan. Being a Waseda University graduate, I must have visited Takadanobaba literally hundreds of times throughout my lifetime. As in, I do not know how many times during my college phase I've visited Negishi, a beef tongue specialty restaurant located right in front of Takadanobaba station. When my friends and I had something to celebrate, that is where we went with their affordable beef and unlimited free rice. And with the Takadanobaba area being a place that is largely loved by many of the younger folks in Japan, it is no surprise that the 22-year-old online streamer Airi decided to conduct her livestream in the Baba neighborhood. And Airi's goal of the day was to actually walk around different areas of Tokyo that were connected by the green Yamanote line while doing fun challenges with her viewers. However, it unfortunately turned out that Takadanobaba was the last ever area connected by the Yamanote line, or any other area on Earth for that matter, that she would ever be able to visit. While Airi was walking along the street with her selfie stick, a man dressed in all black, black hat, black jacket, and black pants, silently approached her from behind. He then brought out a 13cm blade that was hidden underneath his jacket and went on to mercilessly take away the life of Sato Airi. Witnesses who saw the crime happen all say that the man was as calm as he could be while he committed the heinous act. He did not shout. He did not get all angry. And after he finished taking the final breath out of Airi with frightening indifference, he picked up Airi's smartphone that was lying on the floor, which was still live streaming everything by the way, and stared blankly into the smartphone screen. He then turned the direction of the smartphone camera to Airi, crouched down, and showed her bloody face to all of the livestream audience. There is absolutely no way that we can show that footage here, not only to follow the YouTube guidelines, but for anyone's sanity. A 7-year-old witness who ran a shiatsu clinic around the area testified as follows. I found out about the incident when a customer ran into the store and said, "A woman walking in front of me has been stabbed." I rushed to the scene and found the woman lying on the ground next to a man who was standing. The woman's face was covered in blood, and the surrounding area was also a sea of blood. The man did not leave the woman's side and seemed to be looking at her face. He seemed so normal, not out of breath or upset, that I couldn't help but ask him, "Have you called the police?" And as stated by the 7-year-old witness, the suspect did not run away from the crime scene and calmly waited until the police arrived, handcuffed him, and took him away. A few hours after the tragedy, on the streets of Takadanobaba, the Tokyo Metropolitan Police announced the name of the murder suspect. His name was Takano Kenichi, a 42-year-old man from Oyama, Tochigi Prefecture. He worked online from his home and sold anime figures and other related items for a living. And when the news of this brutal crime initially broke out in Japan, the case was framed in such a way that Kenichi, or Ken as how he was referred by people who knew him, we'll be referring to him as Ken from this point onwards as well, was one of the many viewers of Airi's livestream that she conducted on the Japanese streaming app WhoWatch, and had some troubles with Airi regarding some of the tips and donations that he made during the livestream. Hence, when a story such as this is heard by the Japanese public, you'd expect them to be heavily rebuking Ken, the suspect who was responsible for taking the last breath out of the 22-year-old Airi, an innocent girl who, on the day, just wanted to walk around the areas of Tokyo connected by the Yamanote line and interact with her livestream viewers. And usually when a murder case such as this breaks out in Japan, the vast majority of Japanese people call for capital punishment to be promptly executed onto the criminal. However, this was really quite a unique case in that, even until this very day, an overwhelming number of the Japanese public actually sympathized with Ken, the suspect, rather than the victim who has passed away. If you're Japanese, you'll viscerally understand what I mean when going through the comment section of any article or video regarding this case. It is almost impossible to find a single comment in Japan that are in support of Airi or provide any condolences to her family. In fact, some are even uneasy with the idea of calling Airi as the victim, as they believe that Ken is rather the victim in this case. Now, we believe that such is a very dangerous opinion to hold, as regardless of what Airi has done onto Ken during her lifetime, it does not justify violence of the kind that she suffered from the hands of Ken. If one is actually to see the state that Airi was in, and her heavily disfigured face when she passed away, they will never be able to say that what Ken has done onto Airi could be ever justified. But then, we still have to ask, why such a public response that is sympathizing with not the victim, but the murder suspect currently prevailing in Japan? What exactly is going on here, and how can we go on to actually fathom the situation? Today's story is far more than just your typical Japanese true crime case. It is a one that prominently shows us a dimension of a social dynamic that is currently prevalent in Japan. It is a one that tells us the perils of untempered greed and how the majority of people in Japan think of the individuals who aim to scam money out of others in the name of borrowing. And most of all, it is a lesson that tells us the precarious relationship that many hosts, hostesses, online figures, and influencers in Japan possess with their viewers and patrons, and vice versa, and the life-ruining outcome that can potentially ensue as a result of this human-to-human relationship. So without further ado, let us dive into today's video. According to his friends and acquaintances, Ken was a person who barely left his house. He was shy, worked from home selling anime figures online, and was not good at socializing. However, for those who actually knew him, they said that he was usually a cheerful and honest person. He was the type of person who got easily scared and was not good at rejecting demands made by others in the fear that he may offend them. One of his friends said that one of his only hobbies was playing Pokemon and Nintendo Switch games. Then in late 2021, Ken first met Airi online from the Japanese streaming app WhoWatch. Ken soon became one of the top donators for Airi during her streams, and their relationship developed to the point that Airi even gave him her personal line account. According to Ken's friend, Ken once proposed to Airi, saying, "I love you." And although there are records of Airi sending affectionate messages to Ken as well, including ones that portrayed love, when it came to actually dating him in real life, Airi rejected him at the end. But his friend said that Ken did not get angry over this. To quote Ken's friend, when Ken heard this rejection, he was like, "Well, that makes sense. Ken is not the type of person to get angry, as he's a calm guy. He's not manly, and he's more of a wimpy type who'd just think, 'Yeah, I thought that you were above my league anyways, haha.'" But then, there was still one reason why Airi kept Ken around in her life and maintained her relationship with him by periodically sending him messages which claimed love and affection, despite the fact that she had no intention whatsoever to ever date him, to take advantage of his finances whenever she wanted. Whenever Airi needed money, from big to small, she headed towards Ken. There are numerous confirmed line messages between Airi and Ken that has been uncovered, and we'll just show a few. This is the conversation that occurred between Airi and Ken on September 8th, 2022. "Can I ask you for a favor?" "What is it?" "I'm sorry, but I left my wallet at my day job yesterday and I don't have any money. So I'd like you to lend me some money. I'll give it back when I go and get my wallet tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. I want you to transfer the sum to the cash card that I have at home, preferably now. Can I deposit money at this hour?" "Yes, just go to the ATM corner at a nearby bank." "Wait a moment, how much do you need? Can you just lend me a few tens of thousands of yen?" Needless to say, Ken did not receive any of this money back. Let's move over to a few days later on September 17th, 2022. Today was the birthday of the most important person at my hostess club, and I was half forced to open a champagne bottle worth 100,000 yen. Seriously? I'm sorry. I know you sent money to me before already, but I've lost all my living expenses. Then after this conversation, Ken transferred money to Airi's cash card account. He obviously did not get any of this money back. We can see that during this initial phase, Airi is essentially testing the air and is basically seeing how much of a sucker Ken really is. She started off by asking for relatively small amounts of money and actually said I'm sorry while she was borrowing the money, something that she progressively did not even do as time went on. Let's have a look at this conversation from September 24th, 2022. Can you just lend me 50,000 yen? Wait a little bit. Yes. Okay, I can make 50,000. I'll send it to you at 8 p.m. So as we can see from the conversations, Ken's friend was absolutely right when he said that Ken was a shy person who feared saying no to others and was overall just not used to any social interactions, especially with a person of the opposite gender. And Airi saw straight through this as well. She incrementally asked for more sums of money in bolder, more unapologetic fashion. On one day, she just straight up asked him, I'll pay you back, although it may take a while. I want to borrow 1 million yen from you. Ken just timidly replied by saying, I understand. Send me your bank account information. And of course, Ken never saw this 1 million yen ever again. And this just goes on and on and on. She continued to tell Ken stories, such as how her sister stole money and ran away with her boyfriend, how her ex-boyfriend was threatening her, how her sister was being forced to conduct S-work to pay off debt, and how she needed money in order to save her sister. And yes, Airi even went on to tell Ken that she needed money because she was vomiting blood and thought she had cancer. And every one of these times, Ken obliged and sent her the money. This led Ken to soon burn his entire life savings of 1.5 million yen. However, Airi then persuaded Ken to borrow money from consumer finance companies. And we all know Ken's personality by now. He said yes, went on to borrow additional 1 million yen from 2 different loan companies. And before he knew it, Ken had lent Airi 2,514,800 yen, or around 17,000 US dollars. Now, $17,000 may not sound like a lot to some people, but for Ken, this money was literally everything that he had and more. We have to keep in mind that Ken is a man who was nowhere close to being rich. He lived paycheck to paycheck by selling anime figures online, and on top of that, he now had heavy debt that he owed to these consumer finance companies with high interest rates. You know the types of loan companies where, if you don't pay them back properly on time, the type of people whom you do not want to see knocking on your front door starts knocking on your front door. As Ken's friend said, I believe Ken believed in Airi's words, I'll pay you back, until the very end. But even almost 3 years after Ken lent his money to Airi, she did not pay a single cent back to Ken. Ken, with his low-paying job, and debt which was gaining interest by the day, was essentially put into a situation of extreme poverty by 2023, where he had to literally go around asking his friends for money so that he could afford to pay for the train back home. His friend told the media that on one day, Ken borrowed 3,000 yen, or around 20 US dollars from him. His friend, fully aware of Ken's financial predicament, told Ken that he did not need to pay this money back. However, his friend said that a few months later, Ken still remembered about the money he borrowed and paid the 3,000 yen back to him. His friend said that Ken would occasionally send him photos of the type of meals that he cooked at home, which were always basically rice, miso soup, and salad. This was essentially worse than Japanese prison food, as when you watch the movies, you'll see that they at least give you a small piece of protein, such as fish, within the meals as well. And all the while when Ken was living in these conditions of extreme poverty, Airi was posting photos every day of herself living inside a luxurious high-rise apartment, playing poker, and taking expensive trips with her boyfriend. So Ken took what he, at the time, thought was the last resort, take Airi to court. His friend stated that Ken said in November 2023, the trial is about to start. I hope I get my money back now. Then I'll be able to eat better food. And he actually won, by the way. On December 2023, the Utsunomiya District Court ruled that Ken was indeed scammed money out of Airi and ordered Sato Airi to pay back 2,514,800 yen plus interest at the rate of 3% per annum from December 8th, 2023. Imagine the relief that Ken must have felt when he heard the verdict. And just to get the facts clear, Ken never once asked Airi to pay back any of the money that he gave her as a livestream donation. Every yen out of the sum of 2,514,800 yen in which Airi was ordered by the court to return was money that she personally borrowed from Ken, promising him that she'll pay it back. However, there was one huge aspect of the whole trial that Ken was overlooking, that this was a civil trial, not a criminal trial. And it has become a huge issue recently in Japan that when people are ordered fines during a civil trial by the judge, they just declare to the court that they have no money left, thus cannot pay back the ordered sum. And this is exactly what Airi decided to pull off. After she lost in the civil suit, Airi threw a mere 30,000 yen or around $200 back to Ken.
I mean, you just throw him something here. Fetch. Fetch.
Far short of the 2,514,800 yen that she actually owed and was ordered by the Utsunomiya District Court to fully pay back. Her side claimed in court that Airi only had 800 yen left in her bank account. When asked in court about the photos of her taking expensive trips and the type of luxurious lifestyle that she enjoyed, living inside her upscale apartment with her boyfriend, Airi claimed that he was no longer her boyfriend now, but her ex-boyfriend, but said that she still lived together inside the apartment with him as she was still an employee of her ex-boyfriend's company and was living together with him as an employee. However, all of this turned out to be a lie, as only a few months later, after she made these claims in court, Airi made a post on her social media that she was now engaged to her ex-boyfriend and that he was now her fiancé. So throughout 2024, Ken continued to live in poverty as the debt from his loan from the consumer finance company snowballed, even despite him winning in the civil trial against Airi. His friend said that Ken actually struggled quite a bit to pay the lawyer whom he hired for the lawsuit as well, but still managed to pay off all of his legal fees in the end. And it seems like by the time 2025 arrived, Ken has psychologically reached the point of no return. In January 2025, Ken sent the final ultimatum to Airi and her fiancé. Ken told him that he was financially in the negatives due to the debt that he has accumulated in order to give the money to Airi and could no longer continue his livelihood. Hence, he told Airi to not even pay back the full sum that she actually owed. He begged her to just pay back at least 10,000 yen. However, his last message, as expected, was completely ignored by Airi and her fiancé. Then fast forward a few weeks, Airi announced on the night of March 10th, 2025 that she was going to be live streaming around the spots connected by the Yamanote line on the day after. Ken watched this live stream, and well, the rest is history. As we have stated earlier in our video, this murder case is far from your typical Japanese crime case. It is a one, when observed deeply, that shows us a dimension of a prominent social dynamic that currently exists in Japan, as well as a one that provides us with large insights into the Japanese psychology. Now, first of all, the true story of the life of Takano Ken is, of course, very much an exceptional story in and of itself. Regardless of how much anyone has suffered from the hands of another, you rarely have a case where the person goes on to stab the other individual to the point of their passing. What he did was unforgivable, and regardless of just how hard the times were for him, he should have sought for another way to solve the problem. But if we are to take the tragic events which occurred on the March 11th, 2025, out of the page of the story of Ken's life, then his life now suddenly becomes a realistic representation of the type of lives that hundreds of thousands, or perhaps millions of middle-aged men currently live in the island nation of Japan. After having lived in Japan for more than decade-plus years, I've came to the realization that Japan is, to a large degree, a winner-takes-all society when it comes to being in a romantic relationship with the person of the opposite gender, or just plain and simple dating. Individuals such as Ken essentially never have a chance to meet or form a relationship with women throughout their entire lives. During the school years, most girls largely do not pay any attention to boys such as Ken. The same scenario applies during his 20s. Most young women of his age usually date or are romantically interested in the more pretty boys. Again, this is not an absolute scenario, but a situation that nonetheless seems to prevail for the majority. Then an individual such as Ken works diligently throughout his 20s and 30s, and by the time they enter their 40s, for the first time in their lives, women such as Airi seem to show interest towards them. They even give him their personal line account, and before sleeping, they might even send him an affectionate message such as, "I cannot live without you." By the way, this was indeed a real message that Airi has previously sent to Ken online and is recorded in the court documents of Ken's civil trial against Airi. But then, little do they know, many of such young individuals are not actually interested in them. They just want the money that these middle-aged men have earned throughout the approximately 20 to 30 years of their working careers. Most of these middle-aged men eventually find this out one way or another. And although there are cases, such as the one of Ken, where the man goes on to take revenge at the specific person whom they were hurt by, the more common case is that a lot of these men just turn bitter, and although in varying intensities, come to possess somewhat of a misogynistic, cynical attitude against Japanese women in general. That is why you'll hear so many middle-aged Japanese men start their jokes with sentences such as, "Japanese women are like this, Japanese wives are like that," that either subtly or just directly disparages the women in Japan. This type of antipathy doesn't just develop overnight and is often largely a coping mechanism adopted by them over time. Now, we can turn this around and equally speak for the case of women in Japan as well. A significant number of women in Japan are simply tired of being stared at, be groped, and be subject to various kinds of crimes from a very young age. Not treated and respected as a human being with a soul and consciousness, but rather a piece of flesh. Some in the West may believe that chikan, or harassment, usually within crowded public transportations such as trains, is something that has been sensationalized by the media. However, if you actually live in Japan for a long time, get to know and make friends with the people from the nation, and just have a conversation with them over drinks, you'd literally be shocked at how more female individuals actually confess to having experienced being groped on trains, or while they were getting off their bikes, etc., compared to the number of women who say that they have never experienced such crimes in their lives. Chikan is such a serious social issue in Japan, and nobody should tell you otherwise. And in the vast majority of cases, who are usually the criminals who get caught with committing chikan and various types of crimes in Japan? The bitter middle-aged men whom their only way to ever have a chance with having physical contact with a person of the opposite gender in their lifetime is to literally walk up from behind them on a crowded train. But then, the truth is that Ken, at least as far as we know, did not let his traumatic experiences with Airi sprout into the wrong direction of misogyny or all-encompassing hatred against the world. According to his friend, Ken largely blamed himself in the last few months prior to committing the crime, saying, "It was my fault for falling in love and being deceived." Even until the very end, when he sent his last ultimatum to Airi and her fiancé in January 2025, after all that he had to suffer from them with their blatant lies in court, he still tried to keep things together and sent them a message in a polite tone. All that he asked for was just a few thousand yen back on a monthly basis. However, as much as Ken tried to keep himself together in the final months, what he did at the end was, well, what we can define as the polar opposite of keeping oneself together. And one may be able to argue that sure, what Airi did against Ken was bad and deserves blame. But what Ken committed at the end of the day was murder, which can be considered as one of the most, if not the most indefensible crime that any human being can commit. Hence, one will most likely expect that there should be at least some degree of criticism that is currently being headed towards Ken's way in Japan. However, if you are to head over to the comment section of any video or article that is reporting on this murder case in Japan, you will literally not find a single comment that is in defense of Airi or chastises Ken for committing such a heinous crime. Let's just head over to the comment section of this news video, for example, and go over the comments. The media is not reporting on how the woman defaulted on her debt and lost the lawsuit. She continued to claim bankruptcy and completely ignored him. It's the woman's fault for making him borrow money from a consumer credit company and not pay him back. He consulted the police and even went to court. Even though the case went to court, the judge sided with the man. Why is there no mentioning of what the victim did to him? She deserved to be killed. Serves her right. A good example of what happens when you underestimate people. I feel sorry for Takano-san for becoming a murderer. Murder is an unforgivable crime, but this happened because she could not do the obvious thing of returning what you borrowed. The more I hear, the more I feel sorry for the man. And if you keep scrolling down the comments, you'll find the person who claimed that Ken should not serve any prison time or downright state that the severity of the financial crime that Airi has committed onto Ken is tantamount to that of murder. And now, when we go over the top comments, you'll notice that there is one overarching theme in most of them: how Airi borrowed money from Ken and did not commit to the most basic human duty of repaying, so she essentially deserved her fate of death. But then, just exactly why does this majority opinion prevail in Japan? Is it because the Japanese people are just extremely stingy and are insanely sensitive with money? No, that is not the case at all. It is because, in the eyes of the average Japanese individual, Airi has committed several cardinal sins that one human being should not go on to do while living in a society with others. The first act that Airi has committed that is not looked upon favorably by the majority in Japan is the fact that she thoroughly ignored the spirit of ongaeshi, which still has unparalleled importance in the everyday lives of the Japanese people. The concept of ongaeshi, although there is no perfect translation into one specific word in English, is a uniquely Japanese term which closely has the meaning of returning the received favor. From the Western perspective, you can consider it as the Japanese culture transcending the notion of favors make the world go around to a whole new level. I loved watching the HBO drama series Billions on Netflix. I avidly watched every episode of the first 5 seasons and enjoyed most of them. And if you've also happened to have watched Billions, you'll know that one of the most prominent themes within this drama series is the cycle of favors which the main characters give and reciprocate with one another. In one of the episodes, Paul Giamatti, who plays the role of the US Attorney for the Southern District of New York, literally said it out loud as one of his lines, in that favors make the world go around. And in that particular sense, the Western world is not completely oblivious to the Japanese sense of ongaeshi, as most people in the West also acknowledge the fact that owed favors must eventually be returned.
Did I forget to send you a fucking fruit basket?
However, when we think of favors, we usually think of deeds that are significant and often don't take into account minuscule favors such as borrowing a person's pen or receiving a bottle of water from a friend who happened to visit the convenience store just before meeting you. In fact, we might not even classify them as favors, but rather as just acts of small kindness or good deeds. However, if we are to closely research and observe the Japanese history, the spirit of ongaeshi, or returning the favor, has a level of significance that is unparalleled in its degree compared to that of most other nations. You only have to look at classic Japanese literature to discover myriad examples of this, as timeless Japanese folklore, such as Jiru no ongaeshi, returning the favor, applies to every single, and I do mean every single act of minuscule benevolent deed that you may have received from another individual. In Japan, you simply do not choose or evaluate yourself of whether the favor that you've received from someone else is big or significant enough to the point that it actually has to be returned. You simply have to return every single one of them. To see this psychology being applied in the everyday lives of the citizens of Japan, we have to look nowhere else but just look at the life of Ken. Even when he was living under extreme poverty and with his friend fully being aware of this fact, thus telling him not to pay back the money, Ken was so ashamed at the burden of having borrowed 3,000 yen, which is around a mere $20, that he made sure to return this 3,000 yen back to his friend as soon as he had the money, as well as get him a 200 yen ice cream cone. His friend said that when Ken bought him the 200 yen ice cream cone, Ken used his credit card and told the cashier that he would like to pay in installments. An installment payment for $1 something ice cream. That is how poor Ken was at the time, but he still felt obliged to return the favor to his friend who helped him out during the hard times. Same with after the civil trial. Ken had absolutely no money left after the civil trial against Airi, and as we all know by now, still did not get paid by Airi despite winning in the trial. In the mindset of a non-Japanese person, then Ken can surely persuade his lawyer that he had no money and that he'll pay the legal fees later. The lawyer, more than well knowing the financial situation that Ken was in and the attitude that Airi was showing regarding the ordered payment, would most likely have fully understood. However, Ken made sure to squeeze out every cent he had and eventually managed to fully pay back his lawyer of the due legal fees. If you've lived in Japan for a long time, you'll know from your heart that Ken is not an exception here. The vast majority of people I know in Japan strictly follow the mindset of ongaishi such as Ken. It is just the way things work in Japan. Let me just give you some personal examples I have from living in Japan since 2012 until we stopped living in Tokyo full-time from 2023. I ordered new Versa grips for the gym, but they were unfortunately too small, so I gave them to my friend Ken. I swear to God, my friend living in Kagurazaka, whom I gave the lifting straps to, really is named Ken. It's quite a common name in Japan. I absolutely do not expect anything from him in return. But then, in a few days' time, he asks if I'm down for some lunch at one of the local restaurants that we enjoyed visiting from time to time and makes sure that he picks up the tab and buys coffee afterwards. The DeLonghi espresso machine that Helen and I had when we were moving from Tokyo back to Seoul after I quit working at the Japanese firm were too heavy for us to take it to South Korea. Hence, I gave it to one of my friends. Then before you know it, he's literally sending elaborate gift boxes all the way to our address back in Korea from Tokyo. Again, another person's experience in Japan may have been different, but this was my experience in Japan. When I provided a favor to a Japanese friend, never once did I not receive the favor back, one way or another. And you do not even have to talk about the money part. First of all, most individuals in Japan do not ask for money to their friends and family, even during their hardest times. The most memorable example I had was when my friend Masa, whom I met from work, was going through a divorce. He was going through such a hard time. He was behind on rent, and although I do admit that I was only able to hear his side of the story, his wife was throwing chairs at him when he returned from work, and just a lot more personal details that cannot all be shared. But essentially, everything around his life just seemed to be falling apart. His dark circles were really like halfway down his cheeks. So feeling what he was going through, I asked him if he needed to borrow some money in order to pay rent, find an emergency place to stay, and so on. But then, I still cannot forget what he told me to this day. He just smiled bitterly, respectfully declined my offer, and said, "I'll just work more overtime hours. We're still in our early 30s. Right now, we have not yet reached the age when we die from overwork." Like, those words still hit me, even to this day. It is true that people who usually suffer in Japan from overwork-related illnesses or undergo karoshi from a health condition such as a heart attack usually have it occurred in their 40s, as that is when the body, at least the average male body, seems to no longer be able to regenerate fast enough and can no longer tolerate the amount of physiological stress induced by factors such as chronic lack of sleep. So in Masa's mind, he's thinking that working overtime on top of the overtime hours he was already working was still less of a psychological burden on him compared to borrowing money from someone else. As after all, in his mind, he'll survive. And he did survive. Shout out to my friend Masa, who actually we married a few years ago. And if a friend of mine in Japan did borrow money from me one way or another, I never had to wait more than 2 weeks. As for them, the shame of owing someone is already too much for them to bear, and repaying the money is on their mind 24/7. And this is how the average psychology of the Japanese individual operates when it comes to repaying favors, or even more importantly, repaying actual borrowed money. So in the minds of most Japanese citizens, when they see the type of acts that were pulled off by Airi, lying and borrowing tens of millions of yen from another individual, then ignore the person who has lent her the money, let alone show the person gratitude, then shamelessly go on to manipulate financial statements of herself in order to still not pay back the owed debt when legally ordered by the very court of the country to repay the money she scammed, while simultaneously providing further humiliation to the person who has helped her by making fun of him when he appeared in the livestream chat, or by posting photos of herself drinking wine at a luxurious tower mansion with her fiancé. All of such acts literally defines her, in the eyes of many citizens in Japan, as the very antithesis of a human being who's behaving as, well, a human being. So when you see all of the extremely harsh comments against Airi by the Japanese people, it is not because the individuals in Japan are these inhumane beings who are insensitive to grave crimes such as murder. It is because the type of behavior that she portrayed throughout her lifetime ignites such, how can we describe it, such gargantuan level of repulsion inside the average Japanese psyche of its exact intensity that a non-Japanese person will most likely never be able to fully understand on a visceral level. and talking about igniting a strong sense of disapproval from the Japanese public as a result of their actions. There has recently been a group of people in Japan who are accumulating more of a negative reputation for themselves by the day. And they're the hosts and hostesses who work in the night entertainment industry, as well as the online influencers and live streamers. It is often technically not right to separate between a host or hostess and an online live streamer in Japan. A large number of female live streamers on the Japanese streaming app where Airi was active in, WhoWatch, for example, are simultaneously hostesses working at a kyabakura or hostess club at night. The exact same applies to hosts working in host clubs and popular male live streamers. And Airi was unfortunately this exact case, as while being a live streamer, she also worked as a hostess at a hostess club as well. So this video could have been titled, Young Hostess Gets Life Taken in Japan, Then Much of the Public Defends the Murderer. Why? And it would also have been a perfectly accurate title, as those were what Airi's two occupations were, a hostess and a live streamer. You can just head to the Japanese streaming app yourself and check it out if you want. You'll immediately see that the app is dominated by streamers whom you can clearly tell also work in the night entertainment industry as a host or hostess, as many of them have a very distinct hairstyle and makeup which makes them instantly identifiable. And the reason why they have been generating such intense public disapproval in Japan in the recent phase is due to the fact that the way in which many of them go on to make substantial amount of financial profits for themselves and the way they just conduct their lives in general essentially goes against almost every single value in which a normal Japanese person considers to be of utmost importance when living one's life. The average Japanese person places tremendous value in being humble and possessing a sense of humility regarding oneself, sometimes to the degree that we consider it to be too far. That is how much the idea of humility is emphasized in the everyday lives of the people in Japan. Then you have these influencers and people who work in the night entertainment industry who are essentially the very antithesis of this by constantly bragging about themselves and how they recorded 20 million yen in sales in the total number of champagne towers in a month, constantly telling others of how they're just built different, even if it means having to lie about the sales numbers or certain information about themselves.
ねえ、本当にね、お金って持ってみたらわかるけどね、もう紙切れだよこれ。これでね、本当に欲しいもんって手に入らないんだよね、やっぱ。
The average Japanese person places tremendous value in not causing meiwaku or harm, trouble onto others, and is taught to feel shame when they have indeed committed an action that has caused meiwaku to another human being. Then you have many influencers and live streamers who could not give a single F about the meiwaku they cause to others on the street when conducting their live streaming, or on a more acute scale, cause extreme meiwaku to the life of others by scamming them from their hard-earned money and place them in the predicament of life-ruining debt. And unfortunately, as epitomized by the attitude shown by Airi, with absolutely no sense of shame or guilt whatsoever about the harm that they have caused.
また金貸してくれって？
やば、またとか、やば。
So in this sense, in the eyes of so many of the people in Japan, this group of night entertainment industry workers, such as hosts and hostesses, as well as the influencers and live streamers in today's age of social media, are just a huge, absolute utter mindfuck of an existence. A true enigma. The creation of almost the very embodiment of the anti-Japanese entity, as in pile up every single type of personality and behavioral trait that goes directly against that of a normal Japanese individual, and turn it into a living, breathing entity. You get many of the hosts, hostesses, influencers, and live streamers of Japan. Now, this is not to say that every single person of such an occupation is a bad person, not at all. Many of them may attempt their utmost hardest to make an honest living for themselves and make sure to never conduct any type of romance scams to their viewers and clients. So it makes it all the more sad that the people of such occupations who do possess an unscrupulous nature will continue to create a more negative image for the rest of them as well. And with the way things are developing in Japan, the Japanese public's heavy disapproval against the host and hostess industry, as well as the online influencer industry, is not going to wane anytime soon. A year ago, it was Watanabe Mai who was caught with her serial romance scams against older men. Half a year ago, it was the story of Ginza's #1 hostess being brutally stabbed to the point of her passing in front of her luxurious high-rise apartment in Nishi Shinjuku by the man whom she conducted a romance scam against by initially promising marriage, then reporting him as a stalker to the police once the man handed her over 10 million yen. And today, it is the story of the tragic passing of Sato Airi by the man whom she once messaged that she loved and that she could not live it out. And if some of the night entertainment industry workers, streamers, and social media personalities of Japan continue to take advantage of the emotions of others, exploit their gullibility, and implement the usage of romance scams to take the every last cent, or in this case, every last yen, away from their victims, then go on to humiliate them for being so naive, the grim reality is that in less than another few months of time, another sad death of an individual caused by the hands of a victim of a romance scam with higher chances than not will once again occur in Japan.